the latest dose of bipolar recorder. This podcast may cause dizziness and blurred vision. Enjoy.
Welcome back to Bipolar Recorder. My name is Hunter Keegan, and I appreciate you checking this show out. Remember that the Bipolar Recorder mini documentary dropped back in May for Mental Health Awareness Month, and that is available on Twitter/X and YouTube. So far, we've received over 10,000 unique viewers, primarily on the X platform, and the reception has been really positive. The easiest way to find the documentary, aside from visiting our X account, is by searching Bipolar Recorder Mini Documentary on Google or visiting bipolarrecorder.com, and you can watch it there on our official site. In other news, I've begun shopping my Happy Valleys manuscript around. Happy Valleys, as some of you may recall, is the working title for my next book. It's another memoir that explores my early journey with bipolar disorder. Happy Valleys is kind of like the grown-up version of my 2020 independently published memoir called My Brain is Trying to Kill Me. Remember that My Brain is Trying to Kill Me is available on Amazon.com, and there are also signed copies available on our official Bipolar Recorder website. I'm really stoked to get this next book out there. I'm trying to go about the traditional publication process this time. If that doesn't pan out within about the next 12 months, then I will proceed with independently publishing. But with this book, it's at a level where I do want to at least try pitching it to larger publishers first and just see if I can get any traction there. Your support is critical in keeping this project operating, and we sincerely appreciate it. Thank you so much to people who are financially supporting this project. There are quite a few of you now, and we really couldn't do it without you, so just a huge thank you. If you would like to support this project financially, check out bipolarrecorder.com or patreon.com, and you can find ways to get merch and other unique things as a token of our appreciation. Anyhow, for today's installment of the podcast, I had the opportunity to speak with one of the students who came out to not only my first Penn State University outreach presentation in October 2023, but also the more recent one I did in April 2024. So she had come not just once, but twice, which was a huge honor. Her name is Ceci, and we recorded this conversation in early May, just about a week after she graduated from Penn State with a dual degree in psychology and theater. During this conversation, Ceci discusses her personal experiences with mental illness while she attended Penn State during the pandemic. We touch on a lot of important topics, including resources for students with mental health concerns, Penn State's party school culture, evolving understandings of diagnostic criteria, and of course, her plans for the future. Toward the end of the conversation, Ceci also shares some feedback with me about the presentations she's seen me do, and she has a couple of follow-up questions. Let's go ahead and roll the audio. Today, I am joined by Ceci, who is a former student of Penn State, recently graduated from Penn State, and that is where I met her when I was doing my outreach presentations back in October and then more recently in April. But Ceci had approached me after one of these presentations and told me about her interest in psychology and her long-term career goals, and also a little bit about her own experience with mental health conditions. So we were able to set up a time to sit down and chat for a bit, and I would like to welcome to the show Ceci. How are you doing today?
Like, oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. I've been looking forward to this for a long time because it's been so long since I myself was a student at Penn State. I graduated in 2014, and you just graduated what, like last week?
Yeah, Saturday.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. So, what is that, like 4 days ago?
Yeah,
Wow, that's so amazing. And can you tell our listeners a little bit about what you were majoring in and the types of courses you were taking there?
absolutely. So I was a double major in acting and psychology. So I got my BFA in acting and my BA in psychology. My courses were kind of all over the place. I was taking acting classes and we take like movement and voice theater history alongside all of these psychology classes. I took personality psych, uh, social adjustment and relationships, clinical psychology, abnormal psychology, research methods, like all of these really important courses. And I think what was really fun about it is I had just as much fun with one major as I did with the other. So it was never, oh, I have to go do my psychology courses. It was like, no, I'm super excited to do both, which was really fun.
That's awesome. And where are you from originally?
So I'm originally from Kansas, and then I moved to Florida, and then that's how I made my way up to Pennsylvania.
Wow, all the way from Kansas to Florida to central Pennsylvania. What drew you to the majesty of central Pennsylvania?
So I auditioned for the acting program, which for anyone who doesn't or isn't familiar with the theater arts world, you have to do a very specific process to get into college for the arts. So I had to send in a virtual audition, and then if I got called back, then I had to go in person. So I had over two auditions for Penn State, plus an interview, plus all of these written things. And the first time I ever came to Pennsylvania was in December of 2023. And when I got there, it just reminded me so much of Kansas in like a very weird way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was like the fact it started as an agricultural college and all of these different things reminded me a lot of Kansas State University. But that kind of made me feel really comfortable, and the people I met just
Mhm.
made it feel like an instant connection. So I knew as soon as I hopefully got accepted, that's where I wanted to be. I ended up getting waitlisted, and then pandemic hit, and I
Mhm.
sent a very passionate email to the head of the BFA acting program and was like, please let me in. And I got in about a week later. And
Wow.
then as soon as I started on my acting journey, I talked to my advisor and I was like, listen, I want to double major in psychology. How are we going to make this happen? And we made it work.
That's awesome. So coming to it's first of all, it's really funny what you mentioned about Kansas and State College kind of having like a similar vibe. When I tell people about the whole, quote unquote Happy Valley thing, it's kind of funny because I'm not sure what people picture. Like, I don't know what people from California picture when they think of Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure if it's like rolling farmland. You know what I mean? Like down in the
Yeah.
valley where it's just flat and you can see the mountains in the distance, but it feels very flat. And like you said, it's got the whole agricultural vibe. A massive part of the campus is still dedicated to whatever the whatever major it is where you're like raising livestock. That yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's just called an agricultural program or what, but
There's
so
like a million different agricultural programs.
yeah, yeah, definitely a myriad there. Kansas, Florida, and then State College. And you said that you were really happy with, how welcoming the scene was there, how welcoming the people were. I think that's really cool. I mean, I had kind of a similar reaction when I first got to Penn State. Just, the community vibe and how friendly people were. It's very unique. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the social scene. Like when I was a student at Penn State, at the time, and you can tell me if it still is this way or not, but Penn State was widely regarded as being like a pretty intense party school. Is it still like that 10 years later, 15 years later?
Definitely. I'm not a party person, so I
Yeah.
can't like talk too much about it. But I kind of made a rule for myself that I wasn't gonna drink on campus until I was 21, which ironically I turned 21 when I was studying abroad, so it didn't even matter. But I didn't even start going out until my senior year. Um, but
Wow.
then like I was seeing all of the bar crawls and all of this like super fun stuff, and the culture is really great. And I mean, it doesn't always have to be about alcohol and drugs, but I mean, sometimes it is. But I know I have friends who are a lot more into the theater kids weren't into the like frat party scene,
Yeah.
but we kind of the theater school had its own culture of like not necessarily like outlandish parties, but like having fun and
Very cool.
yeah.
I think that's really, really respectable that you set those boundaries in place for yourself and we're like, I'm gonna wait until I'm of legal age and all of that. I think that's great. I had a very different experience, as you know, having listened to a couple of my presentations that I've done. Um, for me, pretty much from the second I got to the university, like I was partying. Like the first night I was there, like I was getting blacked out with like my homies. And so in terms of the whole cultural scene, in that sense, I also was not really going to frat parties and stuff. I was friends with like people in the snowboard club, even though that I didn't snowboard, and all these like people who had houses and stuff off campus. And yeah, I mean, the whole drinking thing was really gnarly. I was a resident assistant for the university too at certain points. Yeah, I know. Your reaction is funny. For people who can't see, she just made a very surprised expression. Yeah, it was interesting having that whole dynamic come into play too, because I was living on campus for the majority of time I was there, but I was also partying on campus a lot too. Um, so in terms of that impact that all of that had on me, it was pretty detrimental to mental health. And I wanted to ask you, have conversations around mental health at Penn State in that community, have they become more open now? Is this something that people are talking about more commonly? Because like 10 to 15 years ago when I was there, none of my friends and I were really talking to each other about like how we're doing emotionally or any of that. So I was just kind of curious if you could share some insight on how that may have changed or may not have changed.
Yeah. Um, so I know that I'm a pretty unique case because my two majors are probably the most open to talking about mental health.
Hmm.
In the theater realm, before every single class, we had a check-in. We would say like a couple sentences about like how we were doing that day, if
Okay.
we were in like a struggling place, like that kind of thing. So our teachers and our classmates knew how to help us. Because since theater is so vulnerable and you kind of have to be on your A game all the time, it's necessary. And then
Hmm.
on the flip side, my other major being psychology, half of the people in those classes were going into the mental health field. So it was very standard for us to not necessarily share personally and like give anecdotes about our own mental health. But if we had chosen to, it wouldn't have necessarily been looked down upon. So with my friends, I was definitely very open about my mental health, and my theater friends were all super open with me. And I didn't have as many close friends in the psychology department. So it's kind of, I can't really speak to that, but I hope that it's getting better. Um, I really do. And I mean, every single syllabus has caps in it.
Okay.
Um, so the resources are there. And the university is very forthright about ways that they can help with anything having to do with mental health.
For sure. So you mentioned CAPS, which what is that Center for s- something
Counseling and
psychology.
psychological
Yeah,
services.
yeah, counseling and psychological services, which is basically Penn State's free mental health care office where any student can go for at the time I was there, I think you could go for a maximum of like 8 or 9 free uh something like that. Does that sound right to
I
you?
think it's 4 now.
It might have been 4 back when I was there too, honestly. But did you ever personally access those services with CAPS?
I did. So when I started college, I had never been in formal therapy. And I had a bit of mental break at the beginning. I'm a very high achiever. I hold myself to a standard of perfection, and I've always struggled with perfectionism.
Hmm.
And within the first 6 weeks of being on campus, I was starting to have panic attacks over like half a point on a test.
Hmm.
Like not even a full point, like a half a point. And in my brain, the way I logicalized it was everything was open note because everything was on Zoom. So if I have access to my notes, I have no excuse to get anything wrong.
Hmm.
So I went to, we had, there's a thing called Caps Chat, which is only open for like 4 hours a week on Tuesdays and Wednesdays or something like that. You're like,
This is
okay,
like an
that doesn't
instant
seem.
message, like an instant message thing with the CAPS
Yeah, I
Center.
think it was a Zoom room that you could
Okay.
like join, and then as soon as there was someone available, they would like talk to you.
Okay.
I haven't used it in a while, so I can't remember quite the details. But
Gotcha.
so I went there twice, well, online twice, and just kind of talked through everything. And by the time the first semester was over, I went to my parents and I said, listen, I have to start therapy. Like, I'm
Hmm.
not okay. Um, and luckily, my parents were fully supportive and they were behind me. So I found a therapist, started therapy, and luckily that helped a lot.
That's fantastic. So, do you think it was really the tests that were like triggering these anxiety attacks, or do you think perhaps there could have been other factors contributing there? For example, being in the new environment. You said this had started happening not when you were in Kansas, but when you had actually come to State College, right?
Yes, so it was kind of funny because the the first time I ever had a panic attack was after I moved to Florida. And then it was like 3 or 4 years after I got to Florida. So it wasn't right off the bat. It wasn't the change. Um,
How old were you at
but
the time?
17.
Okay.
Um, so, and then it happened not like very often. Like I wouldn't qualify myself as having a panic disorder or anything along like those serious lines, but it happened a couple of times, and then I started developing a fear of flying, and I started developing different anxiety things, and all of a sudden it was like very later to be called generalized anxiety disorder by my therapist.
Hmm.
But it was very clear that something was kind of starting to happen there. And then you're right, it did get not blown out of proportion, but it was worsened by I don't even know if it was the new environment so much as just there was so much going on my freshman year of college between the pandemic and not being allowed to make it's not that I couldn't make friends, but it was difficult because
Hmm.
we couldn't eat in the dining halls, we couldn't go to each other's rooms, we couldn't do anything along the lines of normal college.
Hmm.
So it was like really hard to kind of get your footing. So I just kind of compensated by that by spending all of my time doing school and holding myself to that standard.
Wow. Yeah, I think you mentioned the COVID impact on I guess the whole on-campus or university lifestyle, and that's something that's definitely worth mentioning too. I mean, uh, I can't imagine what that would have been like having this pandemic happen, right before you're supposed to go off to school, and then you said you were online for basically 2 years, didn't get to the actual campus until 2023, I believe you said, right?
I was on campus, but the first year I spent all of my time in my dorm room. And the
Okay.
second year, everything was just like masked and social distanced. So it was still
Wow.
really strange.
That's so bananas. So, do you think that the pandemic had a direct impact on your mental health too?
Probably, I would say yes.
So, you'd been having some issues with anxiety in your late teens, and you started seeing a therapist, which I think is phenomenal that you recognized that that was a good idea at the time. That's a big step for a lot of people. Um, After you started working with this therapist, and they recognize that you may have generalized anxiety disorder, um, was there anything else that came up during that time, or any other type of mental health issue that you experienced as a student?
Yes. So my freshman year, I started having a lot of issues with food, and kind of started developing disordered eating habits, without realizing it. I I had a super bad episode of food poisoning right before I left for college, like
Mm,
3 days before. And so I was like super on edge about anything I eat is going to make me sick and all of this stuff,
hmm
like right off the bat. And then because I was coming to a new environment, it was an idea of, well, I have to eat at the dining hall and I'm eating these new foods and I'm eating all this stuff. And I got a little bit better. Both of my parents are medical, so they told me brat diet, bananas, rice, applesauce,
hmm
toast. They were like, if you're feeling sick, like do that. So I did that for that whole year, but it was a matter of anytime I expanded, I thought I was gonna get worse. I thought I would be sick. I thought I would start throwing up, anything like that. Um, so the first year it was fine. I was like making it work. But it was really the second year, my sophomore year, that I started restricting super unintentionally. Um,
mm,
as so it would be a matter of if it wasn't on my safe foods list, I wouldn't touch it. And my safe foods got to be like five things. It was like oatmeal, bread, potatoes.
hmm
It was like really weird stuff. Like I had no source of protein, I had no source of calcium or any of that stuff. Um, and so I ended up reaching out to CAPS my sophomore year to
hmm
try and find a new therapist. And my case manager was like, okay, we'll set you up with like an intake specialist from CAPS who can help you find somebody in the community. And I did an intake appointment and they were asking me all these questions and I was answering. And as soon as the appointment ended, they go, I think we need to get you worked up for an eating disorder. And I was like,
hmm
what?
hmm
um, and so it was that for a couple weeks before I was diagnosed with avoidant restrictive food intake disorder or ARFID. Um, and then I spent the rest of my sophomore year not getting better, despite the fact that I had care. So there's a program at Penn State, which I'm so grateful for, called HEALS, Healthy Eating and Living Support.
Okay.
Um, and they partner with your whole care team. So it's your therapist, your nutritionist, and your doctor.
hmm
And you have like bi-weekly appointments, you have weekly nutrition appointments, weekly therapy, all of this stuff to try and help you through your eating
hmm
disorder. Um, and it it helped somewhat. There were a few things, but I was so hesitant to get better. in a way. I was like, I can't risk it because I was doing these shows and I was doing all this other stuff. And I was like, in my head, if I tried a new food, I was going to be out.
Hmm.
I couldn't have
Hmm.
performed. So that was when, probably in about April, we started searching for outpatient or looking for other therapy options.
Hmm.
I was taken into an outpatient virtual program
Yeah.
in May of 2022. And I spent a month in intensive outpatient online. And then by some miracle, I left with like not fixed, but I was doing so much better after I got that help, which I was so grateful for.
So you found the online IOP actually to be pretty useful?
It was not perfect.
Hmm.
Um, Sitting at your computer screen from 8 to 4
Yeah.
was a lot. Um, and especially considering the fact that I had already been doing school online and all of this different stuff, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I think really the big thing that came out of that was my psychiatrist. They put me on a new medication that really helped. And just like the camaraderie, I think,
Mm.
meeting other people who were facing similar things. I was the only person in my program with ARFID. Everybody else had more anorexia, bulimia, binge eating kind of stuff. But it was really interesting because I think it was like my second week, the the people asked me the therapists asked me to share. They were like, "Hey, will you talk about like ARFID to
Mm.
your whole
Hmm.
cohort because this is something most of them probably don't have any familiarity with, and it's important to help raise awareness."
Hmm. Regarding the HEALS program, did that also involve like any sort of community peer support group sort of thing?
It could have. There were group supports available.
Okay.
Um, because of my school schedule, I could not go to any of them. So I was never really participating in that. But I think I found peer support within my theater group,
Hmm.
because, as I mentioned before, we were all pretty open about our mental health, and there were at least four of us with eating disorders at Penn State in the theater school, which is like, or in the BFA acting program, which is like 40 people total at a time. And there were four of us with eating disorders. So it's like we found each other,
Hmm.
and we knew we had that support if we needed it.
That's great. I think the value of community support is tremendous. It's something that was definitely missing from my recovery plan for many years, really up until about 2020 or 2021. And I started, finding, for example, Smart Recovery, which also has an eating disorder like sub focus as well. If you didn't know about that, they can be. I have several friends who have used them for eating disorder recovery purposes. And of course, also addiction recovery is what SMART is mainly known for. But I was involved with SMART, with DBSA, which is Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance. And then over the last couple of years, obviously, I've been doing the bipolar recorder thing, which, in addition to this podcast, consists of a very large online community that has kind of just developed around this. And it's so interesting. It's so therapeutic because it's like my own project, but also I get so much out of it at the same time. So it's definitely really important that you brought that up. And it's something that I hope more people will continue thinking about as the future unfolds. Do you have any general advice for someone who, for example, is facing challenges with an eating disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, but also trying to manage a very intensive college course load? Is there anything that you found to be helpful? I mean, you've described yourself as an overachiever, getting straight A's, but like not even straight enough. So, I mean, yeah, what guidance do you have?
I think the advice I would tell my younger self and anybody who would be open to it is to ask for help, not just in a mental health capacity, but in anything that you can manage to ask for help with. Um, I know for me, like getting help with preparing food or like
Mhm.
making the meals was like super helpful. Um, and then with whenever their project, actually trusting my classmates to do their portion of the work as opposed to having to do everything myself. So I think putting faith in other people and asking for help when need be is probably advice I would give anybody, but especially people who are struggling with any kind of mental health concerns.
Yeah, definitely reaching out for that support can be huge. And I think also knowing where to find that support is really important too, because I think what a lot of this boils down to is in many cases, people know that they need help, but they're not really sure where to find it. And they're not sure what appropriate help for them would even really look like. So I totally encourage people to explore those types of resources. Go to like psychologytoday.com or check out like the bipolar recorder Twitter feed, whatever format you're doing it in. It's good to have as many resources in your toolkit as possible. Before we move further forward, I also wanted to mention regarding RFID, I did not have a chance to really do in-depth background research on it before this call. But what you were just describing eerily reminds me of exactly what I was going through in, gosh, like 2018. I don't know if you were at the presentation where I was talking about having this like psychotic depression where I was restricting the type of food that I was eating. And like yourself, I was basically on a brat diet. I would only eat white rice and white bread and turkey, like cold cuts of turkey, because I thought anything
Mhm.
else would like poison my body. Um, I think that if people have not really suffered from that before, they may not understand how fucking scary that is. Like it's not it's
Yeah.
very disturbing on like a personal internal level too. And I yeah, so I really appreciate you explaining more about that. I'm not saying I necessarily had RFID or anything like that, but just what you were describing, it sounded relevant to something similar that I had experienced in the past. So I thought that was very interesting. I wanted it to transition a little bit more into talking about what the future is looking like for you. Like we were saying at the beginning, you just got your two degrees, your degree in acting and your degree in psychology. So, what is the path forward for you at this point? What are you looking to do with this educational background?
Yes. So I think it's been up and down. I have had various plans that have gotten scrapped and then rethought and moved over a million times. But right now, I am trying to find a job
Hmm.
somewhere in the psychology field to bolster my applications to grad school
Hmm.
either next year or the year after. And I'm going to go to school for mental health counseling specifically. I haven't decided if I want to get my PsyD or my master's yet. But I want to stay in the city. I want to stay in New York City and do everything because this is where I want to be permanently.
Hmm.
So I want to build that community. Um, and then after I graduate and become a licensed counselor, I want to either join or start my own practice, specifically working with performers. And I think that's something that I have special expertise in. As I studied both of them, I understand the stress of what it means to be a performer.
Hmm.
Um, and I think the performers also reach a lot of underserved communities. There are a
Hmm.
lot of people of color, LGBTQ plus people, trans people, all of these different people who are so underserved. And I want to be a outreach for as many people as I possibly can in the theater world. Um, and so, yeah, hopefully I'll be able to kind of help actors with their mental health and destigmatize that.
Yeah, I mean, you sound uniquely equipped to work with that type of diverse population. So I think that's really cool. And I was wondering, regarding entertainers or performers, there's obviously such a strong level of a very unique type of stress that you're under. I think the like performance anxiety piece of it, but also just the inherent nature of like, oh my God, people are judging me as they're watching this. And you can get very in your head. I was wondering if you have any examples of like famous actors or musicians or entertainers who you think could be examples of successful individuals with mental health conditions. Is there anyone who like immediately comes to mind?
I know people think of Robin Williams a lot
Hmm.
when we think of entertainers with mental health conditions.
Hmm.
I think a lot of comedians actually. I had a friend who just wrote an essay about this, but I I know personally from just watching comedy, a lot of them kind of reference their own mental health and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And it's one of those moments where it's finding a way to cope with the stress through your art
Hmm.
is such a unique and special way to do it. I think being able to actually communicate what you're feeling to the world in a succinct and whether it be dance or singing or comedy or any of the above, kind of building that community. It provides a way for the outreach to happen and to help bolster community. And then that helps destigmatize and it helps more people be seen, which I think is a really special part of entertainers who are willing to share what they're struggling with.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that definitely notable people can be very instrumental to opening wider conversations. And just as you were speaking, I was trying to think of some examples too. And you specifically mentioned comedians. So do you know Bill Hader? From
Mhm.
yeah, he a couple of years ago released some videos about living, I think with generalized anxiety disorder actually. And I thought that was cool because and especially I think for men too, right? Because a lot of men are like, "Oh, I couldn't have mental illness. I can't talk to a therapist." It's really
Yeah.
stupid, but I think it is meaningful when you see people who are from some of these like quieter groups actually coming out and being like, "Hey, this is something we need to talk about." Well, speaking of performing, you've seen me perform a little bit, if you can call doing a college mental health outreach presentation a performance. So I was actually just kind of curious, what were your thoughts about these bipolar recorder presentations you've seen so far? Any just reactions or maybe like comments or questions that you had?
I think, well, first of all, I thought it was like marvelously done. It was super educational and it was engaging, which is always fun. Um, but hearing somebody deep dive into a specific mental health condition, like,
Mm,
I mean, as an undergraduate, part of the deal is you always skim the surface. You don't have a chance to really like go into what it actually is like. So hearing more about bipolar specifically, and having a chance to engage in a discussion, especially this most recent talk that you did. All of the questions and the participants, like all of my classmates, we were all so excited to just keep talking to you, which was really exciting. And I think it was helpful for a lot of us because some of us did mention having mental health conditions and kind of using your own experience to compare to our experience and kind of give us a path forward. I know one thing that you specifically talked about that was always that struck me the first time and the second time was your journey with medication,
Hmm.
because I went on a similar journey. I did not want to be medicated for the first year I was in therapy. And then after I got diagnosed with my eating disorder and all this stuff, that's when I was like, okay, I'll go on medication.
Yeah.
Um, but I think just the outreach and the advocacy gave me such hope for where the future of non-clinical um, outreach can go, and kind of just where the world will eventually come to when it comes to mental health, and considering mental health just as important as physical health.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for saying all of that. I'm really glad that it sounds like you found it worthwhile on some level. That's super exciting to hear. And you mentioned the questions from the audience, and I completely agree with you. The first time I came out, the actual presentation was a lot longer, and so after that, I was like, I really would have loved to have had more time for like a proper Q&A session. So that's something that Dr. Weimer and I discussed very early on as I was putting those presentations together. And I agree completely. Like people had such thought-provoking and very deep questions that I had to like kind of, I it wasn't like people were putting me on the spot or anything, but it was just questions that I wouldn't have expected necessarily. And it was really cool. So I'm glad that it was mutually beneficial and educational. That's super great. All right, I had a couple of other questions for you. Okay, here's just a random question for you. What is the number one most important non-academic thing you learned at Penn State?
Oh my goodness. This shows how much time I spent in the classroom.
You're like I
Um,
only went to class. What are you talking about?
oh my goodness. Well, I seeing as I double majored in 4 years, like I did nothing else. But I think I mentioned it earlier, but my study abroad experience,
Hmm.
the acting program goes to London your second semester of your junior year. And that was maybe the best thing that has ever happened to me. Um, I it was the first time I was living on my own because I stayed in the dorms all 4 years of college. So it was the first time I was like cooking for myself and shopping for myself and doing all of this
Yeah.
different stuff. So that taught me how to be an adult, but I also got the opportunity, which I am very grateful for, to travel a lot,
Hmm.
um, and just explore. And I found out that I really do like exploring. Like I'm very much a planner, but when I plan to be more spontaneous and everything, which is kind of an oxymoron there, but planning to be spontaneous and actually give myself time to be like, okay, today, this weekend, because we would always have 3-day weekends, I'm going to go to this random small town in England, or I'm going to fly to Switzerland or do something outlandish, was super helpful as I get out of college and kind
Hmm.
of move on to an adult world.
Very cool. Yeah, you got to get out and experience the world because in those classrooms, it's a very, very specific sort of context. So I think that's awesome that you're able to get out there and do some of that adventuring. And I hope in the future that's something you'll continue to be able to do. Before we started recording, you mentioned that you had maybe a couple of questions for me about some stuff. Do you want to segue into that? Or at the end, of course, we can discuss anything you would like to plug or any projects that you have. Um, but yeah, do you have any questions for me before we kind of wrap up here?
I did have one. Now I have to think of it again.
That's okay.
Um, I think I'm gonna fire back the what would you say to either your younger self or anybody who is dealing with any kind of mental health thing, or somebody who just doesn't quite know what's going on. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I get that question quite a bit, and I think what I would say is it's a buzzkill of an answer, but it's honestly like avoid alcohol and hard drugs because the alcohol in of itself is incredibly triggering. It's immediately harmful. It's harmful in the long term. And if you have an underlying mental health issue like bipolar disorder, it's like throwing gasoline into a bonfire. Like it really is. And so I tell people to avoid that stuff. My recovery process has been interesting over the years. But I'm happy to say that I've been back on the right track lately, and it's something that I've really been thinking about a lot is just, man, like when you start abusing those substances and you start like fucking around, stuff starts going south like really quickly. So that's something that I'm personally really trying to remind myself of right now. So yeah, I mean, I know for people like you, that's not so much of a concern. But like for people with bipolar disorder, substance abuse issues are extremely comorbid. Like I think it's like 70% of bipolar people are also addicts of some kind. It's something like that. Or not are addicts, but they have like tendencies toward that. So yeah, that's what I would say. Like avoid alcohol, avoid cocaine, methamphetamine, oxys, and obviously any of the hard stuff I would just stay away from. In terms of non-drug related advice, though, I think that I would say what's really critical is finding community, and you brought that up too. I think that is really one of the most beneficial things you can do for yourself. Find and speak with other people who have been through similar things and hear from them how they're living their lives. I'm not saying don't listen to doctors, but just be aware that doctors are going to be speaking specifically from a very narrow perspective, and there's certain things they can and can't say. When you're with peers, you can talk a little bit more openly and you can really get the straight lowdown. At least in my experience, that's what I've found. And I think that's something that gets forgotten a lot. So that's why I would highlight it.
I mean, that kind of reminds me of what we were talking about after the talk a couple months ago, because I had asked a question about uh, mental health in the media, and I was like, what was your top, like, what's your best example of a good example of
Hmm.
showing mental health correctly? And then we talked about all of the different movies and TV shows that have done it incorrectly. And you just brought up like the fact that sometimes they go to doctors rather than actual lived experience.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important because it reminds me of this thing that I've shared with you, that I have had to educate people, doctors,
Hmm.
therapists. I've had to educate them about ARFID. And I understand that it's relatively new, 2013, but it's still over 10 years old.
Hmm.
Like the person who is diagnosed with it shouldn't be like, okay, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
Um, so I'm just trying to raise awareness. And
absolutely.
that was, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really mind-boggling that these people who are supposed to be subject matter experts in diagnosing mental health conditions wouldn't be aware of something like ARFID. And you're right. I mean, 2013 is over 10 years ago now. So it takes a while for, as cutting edge as many of these psychiatrists claim that their science is, it seems like a lot of them are still very behind the times. All right, so we are wrapping up here, but I wanted to ask you if you have like any website or social media or other sort of projects that you work on that you would like to plug for the audience so they can learn more about you and what you've been doing. Or if not, if you just have any closing thoughts or words of wisdom.
Well, I can use this to plug my audiobooks. Um, yeah, like I said, I'm an actor. So if you look me up, cc.garci on Instagram, you can kind of follow along.
Can you
I'm
spell that?
hoping,
Can you spell that for the crowd?
yes, CC, like the two letters, and then period, GARCI.
Okay. All right, cool. I'll put
Very,
that in the
very
episode
creative.
description. I'll put that in the episode
Okay.
description too, so people can find it.
Um, yeah, and I'm hoping to start talking more about mental health as as I've finished my degree and I'm starting to hopefully find a job that has to do with more of the mental health kind of realm and
Mhm.
eventually go to grad school. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wish you all the best with that. It sounds super exciting. And, when you first get out of college, there is that weird, awkward middle ground of like finding a job and starting your career path. But I think it'll go well for you. I think your head's in the right place, and I really appreciate you coming out and sharing your perspective on this show. I love speaking with younger people who, have just recently, I mean, very recently started going through some of these issues, and I think that as you continue to move forward in life, you'll continue learning, and it can be very fulfilling, even though it's challenging and difficult sometimes. I really enjoy speaking with people about their early journeys with mental illness. I'd like to thank Ceci again for taking the time to come on the show and share her valuable perspective and insight. As she mentioned, Ceci is on Instagram at cc.garci, spelled letter C, dot GARCI, if you'd like to follow her. I've also added that to the episode description. Remember to check out the Bipolar Recorder mini documentary. It's made a splash and I'm really proud of it. There are lots of cool things going on behind the scenes with Bipolar Recorder right now, and I can't wait to share them with you. So for right now, check out that documentary, keep checking out the podcast, keep telling your friends about the show, about all these cool things we have going on, because it's really important to get that word of mouth support out there. That's how projects like this pick up momentum. That's how we've been picking up momentum this whole time. So it's incredibly helpful. Do be sure to rate and review the show as well on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, because that really helps bump us up in the algorithms. Bipolar Recorder is on Twitter/X at Bipolar Recorder. This is where you can find a ton of great extra content and also join our regularly hosted online mental health peer support spaces. We've got a great community on there. My personal account on Twitter, or X, is at HHKeegan. Bipolar Recorder is also periodically active on Instagram, Mastodon, etc. Those accounts are also at Bipolar Recorder. Thank you so much for listening. Remember that we can't do this without your support. So again, visit bipolarrecorder.com and or patreon.com to buy signed copies of My Brain is Trying to Kill Me, stickers, other cool stuff. My name is Hunter Keegan. Have a stable day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Bipolar Recorder is a listener-supported show. To help keep the show running, consider checking out our Patreon page or visiting bipolarrecorder.com.
Unless otherwise stated, the hosts and guests on Bipolar Recorder are not licensed mental health professionals. Bipolar Recorder is not a substitute for therapy or professional medical intervention. If you are having a mental health crisis, please contact your local emergency services.